Imagine waking up one morning to a reality you never saw coming. Titles you've earned, privileges you've lived with, and a status you thought was untouchable suddenly stripped from you. Every glance from the public, every headline, every social media post reminding you that you are no longer who you believed you were. For Meghan Markle, that nightmare became real. It started like any other morning in her life outside the palace walls. Quiet, controlled, but behind the closed doors of a secure London estate, a single piece of paper awaited her. Not just any paper, but a formal declaration from the highest authority in the United Kingdom, King Charles himself. The letter was short, precise, and utterly devastating. The words on that page were like a thunderclap that shattered her carefully constructed world. Lady Louise Windsor would take over the royal titles that Meghan had held since her marriage. And the decision was final. No appeal. No negotiation. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. You might be asking yourself, how could this happen? How could the king, her father-in-law, bypass Meghan entirely and place a young royal, barely in her 20s, into the position Meghan had worked so hard to embody? But the truth is far more complicated than a simple matter of titles. This decision was the result of years of behind-the-scenes palace politics, quiet alliances, and personal judgments that the public rarely gets to see. It was a calculated move, and Meghan, despite her global fame and influence, was caught completely off guard. Imagine the shock, the disbelief. Meghan, a woman who had navigated countless public controversies, who had stood under the microscope of global media scrutiny for years, suddenly found herself stripped of symbols that were deeply intertwined with her identity. These weren't just ceremonial titles. They represented access, authority, and recognition within an institution that valued lineage above all else. Losing them was more than symbolic. It was personal. And yet, Meghan's story didn't start here. To understand the full weight of what happened, we have to rewind and look at the delicate web of relationships, expectations, and unspoken rules within the royal family. From the moment she met Prince Harry, Meghan had been navigating a world filled with traditions she didn't fully control, protocols she didn't fully understand, and scrutiny she could not escape. Every gesture, every public appearance, every word in an interview could be interpreted as either loyalty or defiance. And throughout it all, Meghan had to find her own voice while existing in a system designed to dictate exactly what she could and could not be. Now, you might wonder, why would King Charles make such a drastic move? After all, Meghan had been widely praised for her charity work, her public appearances, and her ability to modernize certain aspects of royal representation. The answer is rooted not just in the present, but in history, precedent, and perception. Royals are symbols as much as they are people. Titles are not simply honorary, they are instruments of legacy. And in this case, the king decided that the legacy had to shift. The person who would carry it forward would not be Meghan Markle, no matter how capable, popular, or charitable she was. Instead, Lady Louise Windsor, a younger, traditionally groomed royal, would inherit the symbols and responsibilities that Meghan once held. The emotional impact on Meghan was immediate and visceral. She reportedly spent hours alone, pacing, rereading the official documents, questioning whether she had done enough to maintain her position in the family hierarchy. Close friends noted that she was shaken, not only by the loss of titles, but by the subtle message behind the decision. The palace did not see her as a permanent fixture within the traditional royal framework. The decision was final, and yet it felt personal. As Meghan grappled with the shock, one question lingered in her mind, and in the minds of royal watchers around the world. What had led to this moment? Was it a reflection of internal family dynamics, strategic positioning, or a quiet fallout from decisions made years ago? The truth is that all of these factors converged to create a perfect storm, a moment that would alter not just Meghan's life, but the landscape of the royal family itself. But let's pause for a moment and consider the broader implications. This wasn't just about Meghan. When Lady Louise Windsor stepped into these titles, it sent a signal, loud and clear, to every member of the royal family, to the public, and to the media. The monarchy's traditional hierarchy was being reinforced. Any deviation, any attempt to modernize from within, could be quietly, yet firmly, corrected. It was a move that reinforced lineage over fame, tradition over public opinion, and strategic continuity over individual accomplishments. And for Meghan, the personal consequences were profound. This loss forced her to reevaluate not only her role within the royal family, but also her identity outside it. Titles had been her bridge to influence, her platform for charitable work, and her symbolic stake in the monarchy's future. Without them, she was left to navigate a world that viewed her through a mix of admiration, skepticism, and relentless scrutiny, without the protective weight of formal status. Every event, every charitable initiative, every public engagement now carried the shadow of the titles she no longer held. The shock of this moment also rippled through her personal life. Prince Harry, known for his protective instincts, faced a dilemma. How could he support Meghan while maintaining the delicate balance with his brother and the king? The media, ever watchful, seized on every hint of tension, amplifying the drama, and feeding the story into an unrelenting cycle of speculation. The palace, too, was forced to manage appearances, internal communications, and the optics of a young royal ascending where Meghan had been established. But what makes this story even more compelling and devastating is the secrecy. While the public learned fragments through official announcements and discreet leaks, the real story unfolded behind closed doors. Conversations in private chambers, whispered debates over protocol, and confidential meetings with legal advisors shaped the outcome. And through it all, Meghan had to process not only the loss of titles, but the realization that in a family built on hierarchy, tradition, and lineage, even someone as publicly influential as herself could be sidelined in a heartbeat. So what happens now? How does Meghan respond to a moment that feels equal parts personal betrayal and professional setback? How does the monarchy reconcile the public image of fairness and inclusivity with the private reality of strategic and sometimes ruthless decision-making? These questions are not just hypothetical. They are the forces driving the next chapter of this unfolding drama. As we prepare to delve deeper into the story, remember this. Titles may be ceremonial, but they carry power, influence, and legacy. Losing them isn't just a legal or formal shift, it's an emotional earthquake. And for Meghan Markle, the tremors of this earthquake are just beginning to be felt. But what Meghan didn't expect was the storm that would follow, not just from the press, not just from the public, but from inside the palace walls. Secrets, alliances, and rivalries that had been simmering for years were about to erupt. And one revelation, buried deep in the folds of tradition and family politics, would change everything, leaving Meghan, Harry, and the monarchy itself on the brink of a historic upheaval. The day began like any other, with sunlight spilling softly across the high ceilings of Meghan's London residence. The world outside moved on, oblivious to the seismic shift about to take place inside those walls. But for Meghan Markle, everything was about to change in a single, devastating instant. A letter arrived, a formal envelope, thick and embossed with the royal seal, hand-delivered by an official aide. The simplicity of its delivery belied the gravity of what it contained. Imagine receiving a document that doesn't just inform you of a decision, but rips away the foundation of your identity. Meghan held the envelope in her hands, fingers trembling ever so slightly. Her mind raced. What could this be? A routine update? A ceremonial notice? A thank you for charitable work? No. The weight of the seal, the precise and cold formality of the lettering, the unmistakable authority it carried, it all suggested one thing. This was not routine. This was final. She tore open the envelope, her heartbeat echoing in the quiet room. Inside was a single sheet of paper, densely worded yet crystalline in its clarity. It read, in language designed to be both official and irreversible, Lady Louise Windsor would assume the royal titles that Meghan had held since her marriage to Prince Harry. The king's decision was firm. There would be no reversal, no negotiation, no appeal. At first, disbelief took hold. Meghan read the letter again, slow and deliberate, searching for an asterisk, a footnote, a subtle caveat that might soften the blow. Nothing. The decision was unequivocal. Titles she had worn proudly, titles that had represented her public role, her integration into the royal family, her connection to the monarchy's lineage, they were gone. In their place stood Lady Louise, quiet, young, and groomed from birth for this moment. For Meghan, the letter wasn't just a formality, it was a message. A message that, despite her accomplishments, her dedication, and her global influence, she was not the person King Charles deemed fit to continue holding these symbols of royalty. The language was careful, almost sterile, but the implications were anything but. The words conveyed authority, lineage, and control, a subtle but unmistakable assertion that tradition would prevail over modernity, that pedigree mattered more than public acclaim. The emotional toll was immediate. Meghan sat alone, staring at the document, heart racing, mind spinning. Memories flashed across her consciousness. Her wedding day, the public appearances, the charity initiatives, the late-night strategy calls with Harry, the moments when she had fought to define her role within the institution. Each memory, once a point of pride, now felt like a reminder of what she had lost. And then came the questions. Why now? Why Lady Louise? Why was the king acting in this manner, at this specific moment? The palace is a world governed by rules that are invisible to outsiders, yet profoundly impactful to those inside. Meghan knew that decisions of this nature rarely happened in isolation. They were the culmination of conversations, meetings, whispered opinions, and carefully weighed judgments that could span months or even years. But understanding that didn't lessen the shock. It only made it sharper. As she absorbed the news, Meghan couldn't help but feel the weight of historical precedent pressing down on her. The monarchy is an institution defined by continuity, by lineage, and by symbolism. Titles are not merely ceremonial. They are instruments of influence and markers of legitimacy. To lose them is to be removed, in a very public way, from a narrative that she had invested so much of herself in shaping. Her thoughts drifted to the media. How would they report this? Tabloids would spin the story into a tale of scandal, gossip columns would speculate endlessly, and social media would explode with opinions, memes, and judgment. Meghan, who had become all too familiar with the public's appetite for drama, understood that the letter would not remain private for long. The optics would be merciless. Every headline would frame her not as a powerful figure stripped of titles, but as a woman cast aside by the royal institution, a cautionary tale of ambition and miscalculation. Yet, amid the shock, Meghan began to process the undercurrents of palace politics that had led to this moment. King Charles's decision was not simply about titles. It was about family dynamics, loyalty, and long-term strategy. In the hierarchy of royalty, personal feelings are secondary to precedent. And in this hierarchy, Meghan, for all her public prominence, was still an outsider by bloodline. Lady Louise, groomed from birth, represented continuity, stability, and an unbroken lineage. The choice was as much about optics and heritage as it was about merit or achievement. In private conversations that followed, Meghan expressed disbelief, frustration, and, eventually, a simmering determination. The letter was more than a document. It was a catalyst, a wake-up call. And as she grappled with its implications, she began to see the layers of intention behind the king's move. There were whispers of alliances forming within the palace, subtle nudges from advisors, and long-standing familial expectations that had quietly, relentlessly, shaped this outcome. The emotional weight was compounded by the realization that Harry, her partner and closest confidant, was now faced with his own dilemma. How could he protect Meghan while respecting the hierarchy and decisions of his father, the king? How could he respond publicly without inflaming tensions or inviting further scrutiny? Every conversation between them became charged with the intensity of a family caught between personal loyalty and institutional duty. As the day wore on, Meghan's mind remained fixed on the letter. She replayed the moment of receipt over and over, analyzing every phrase, every subtle nuance, every implied judgment. The loss of titles was not just a professional setback. It was a personal affront. It represented the stark reality that, in the royal world, even someone with global fame, immense influence, and deep personal commitment could be sidelined without warning. Yet, Meghan's reaction was not merely despair. Within her, a quiet resilience began to stir. Titles may have been stripped, but her voice, her platform, and her influence were still her own. She understood that while the letter represented an ending, it also marked the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter that would require careful navigation, strategic thinking, and, above all, strength. And as the day drew to a close, one thought loomed larger than any other. The storm that followed this letter would not be confined to her private life. It would ripple across the media, the public, and the palace itself. Secrets would emerge, alliances would be tested, and hidden rivalries would surface in ways that no one, not even Meghan, could fully anticipate. But what made this moment truly unforgettable and terrifying was the realization that this letter was just the first move in a much larger game. A game where titles, power, family, and public perception intersected in ways that could alter the course of Meghan's life forever. The true consequences were still hidden, waiting to unfold in the days, weeks, and months to come. And in that quiet, heavy moment, Meghan understood a truth she had long known but never fully confronted. In the royal world, no one is untouchable. No one is permanent. And even someone as visible, celebrated, and influential as herself could be reminded of her position in the hierarchy in the most sudden and irrevocable of ways. The name Lady Louise Windsor had long been familiar to royal watchers, yet for many, she had remained a quiet figure in the shadows of the monarchy. Poised, elegant, and meticulously groomed from birth for her role in the royal lineage, Louise had never sought the spotlight. But the moment King Charles made his decision, she suddenly became the center of a narrative she had not publicly anticipated, taking over the titles that once belonged to Meghan Markle. To fully grasp the impact, we must first understand who Lady Louise is. Born to Prince Edward and Sophie, Countess of Wessex, she grew up with the kind of preparation that the royal family reserves for its heirs. Every public appearance, every wave, every smile for the cameras was guided, coached, and rehearsed from an early age. Etiquette lessons, historical education, protocol briefings, all of these were part of her daily life. By contrast, Meghan came to the royal family as an outsider, navigating a world of traditions and unspoken rules that were completely foreign. The contrast could not have been starker. When news of the king's decision reached the public, it ignited a wave of curiosity. Social media buzzed with speculation. Who is this young woman stepping into Meghan's former titles? Why now? And most importantly, what does this mean for Meghan? The optics were clear. The monarchy had chosen continuity and pedigree over fame and influence. Lady Louise, with her calm demeanor and royal blood, represented stability, a return to tradition. But what was Louise's reaction to this sudden elevation? Sources close to the family reported a mix of surprise, humility, and quiet determination. Unlike Meghan, whose titles carried the weight of public scrutiny and international attention, Louise approached her new role with the ease of someone trained from birth to navigate the delicate currents of royalty. Her parents, Edward and Sophie, were reportedly supportive yet cautious, understanding the delicate balance required when stepping into a public role previously held by someone as high-profile as Meghan. The public, meanwhile, was quick to draw comparisons. Meghan's style had been modern, bold, and sometimes unconventional, a reflection of her personality and experiences outside the royal sphere. Louise, on the other hand, embodied a more traditional form of royalty, understated elegance, formal comportment, and adherence to every nuance of protocol. This contrast fueled discussion, debate, and even controversy online. Could someone so young and relatively unknown fill the shoes of a duchess with global recognition? Or was this a statement by King Charles, signaling that tradition would always outweigh celebrity influence within the monarchy? Behind the scenes, the palace had anticipated these reactions. Advisors understood that public perception was crucial, and that Louise's elevation would be scrutinized as much for her personal qualities as for the symbolism it carried. Every step, every public appearance, would now be interpreted through the lens of Meghan's legacy. The pressure was immense, yet Louise reportedly approached it with the poise and preparation instilled in her since childhood. This moment also highlighted a deeper tension within the royal family. Meghan had been an outsider, navigating an institution that often judged her for what she was not, born into royalty. Louise, by contrast, was the embodiment of everything the monarchy valued: lineage, tradition, and seamless integration into the family's hierarchy. King Charles's decision underscored a stark reality. In the world of royalty, bloodline often outweighs accomplishments, and tradition can overshadow personal charisma or international fame. But there was more than just optics at play. Louise's ascent carried subtle but powerful messages about power, hierarchy, and influence. By placing her in Meghan's former position, Charles was asserting control over the narrative, reinforcing the primacy of bloodline and continuity over modern reinterpretations of royalty. It was also a quiet reminder to every member of the family. Roles, privileges, and recognition are contingent, and even the most prominent figures can be repositioned or replaced according to the will of the monarchy. For Meghan, the contrast was painful. Watching Louise step into the spotlight, assuming the titles that had once symbolized her status and influence, was a harsh reminder of what she had lost. The titles had been more than ceremonial. They were markers of identity, symbols of belonging, and tools for her charitable and public endeavors. Seeing them transition seamlessly to someone else, a young woman groomed from birth for this very moment, was a blow both personal and professional. At the same time, Louise's emergence was a calculated move by the monarchy. Unlike Meghan, Louise had no controversial past, no media scandals, and no public narrative that could distract from her role. Her ascendancy reinforced the perception of stability, continuity, and control, qualities the royal family values above all else. Every wave, every smile, every public gesture was designed to signal competence, grace, and adherence to centuries-old traditions. Public reaction was intense. Social media erupted with commentary, news outlets published profiles and analyses, and royal experts debated the implications. Some praised Louise as a breath of fresh air, a young royal embodying tradition with elegance. Others questioned the fairness of the decision, framing it as yet another setback for Meghan, a woman who had faced relentless public scrutiny while contributing meaningfully to the royal platform. And through it all, Louise remained composed, aware of the scrutiny, and careful to project the image expected of her. Yet the story was far from simple. Louise's ascendancy also stirred tensions within the royal family itself. Advisors and senior family members quietly discussed the optics, the potential backlash, and the message being sent. Was this a purely strategic move, or were personal considerations, loyalties, rivalries, judgments about character, also influencing the king's decision? The answer, like many royal matters, lay somewhere in between. A mixture of pragmatism, family dynamics, and the unspoken codes of monarchy. Meanwhile, Meghan faced an emotional reckoning. The symbolic loss of titles represented not just public displacement, but a deeper sense of exclusion. Titles are not mere words. They are keys to power, influence, and belonging within the royal system. Losing them meant losing a part of the platform she had used to engage with charities, public initiatives, and global audiences. It also signaled a clear message. Within the traditional structure of the monarchy, Meghan's role was secondary to that of bloodline heirs. And yet, the rise of Louise was not merely a story of loss. It was a story of contrast, strategy, and the delicate balance of public perception. By placing a prepared, traditional royal in the position Meghan had held, the monarchy aimed to stabilize its image, reinforce lineage, and assert control over the narrative. For royal observers, it was a masterclass in strategic communication, optics, and long-term planning. For Meghan, it was a stark reminder of the personal costs of stepping into a world that demands conformity, tradition, and silent obedience. But what made this moment truly compelling was the subtle undercurrent of surprise. No one outside the palace expected Louise to rise so quickly, so quietly, and so decisively. The move caught media, public, and even some family members off guard. It was a calculated decision, designed to assert authority while maintaining the appearance of seamless continuity. And as Louise assumed her new role, the message was unmistakable. The monarchy's hierarchy was unyielding, and tradition would always take precedence over celebrity, influence, or modern reinterpretations of royalty. And yet, for all the elegance and preparation, Louise's rise would not be without complications. Behind the smiles and formal appearances, questions lingered. Could she maintain the poise expected of someone stepping into Meghan's shoes? Would the public accept her as a replacement, or would comparisons continue to dominate headlines? And, most importantly, how would Meghan respond to the world watching her titles being reassigned in real time? As Louise prepared to step into her public role, one thing was certain. the ripple effects of this decision were just beginning. Relationships would be tested, narratives would shift, and the royal family's internal dynamics would face scrutiny like never before. The elevation of Lady Louise Windsor was not just a procedural change. It was a dramatic, symbolic act with emotional, political, and public consequences. And just when it seemed that the transition might unfold smoothly, a quiet, hidden tension began to surface within the palace walls, one that threatened to upend not just Meghan's perception of events, but the very stability the monarchy sought to project. Secrets, rivalries, and unspoken resentments were simmering beneath the polished exterior, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And in that quiet anticipation, a question loomed over Meghan, Louise, and the entire royal family. Would this shift of titles mark the start of a new era of stability, or the beginning of a series of conflicts and revelations that no one could have predicted? The public only sees the polished announcement, a formal statement, carefully worded, declaring that Lady Louise Windsor would assume the titles Meghan Markle once held. But behind that single sentence lies months of deliberation, private counsel, and intricate palace politics. This was not a decision made lightly, nor one reached in isolation. King Charles's choice represented the culmination of centuries of tradition, complex family dynamics, and his own vision for the monarchy's future. To understand the magnitude of this decision, consider the position Charles occupies. He is not just a father or grandfather. He is the sovereign, custodian of centuries of history, and the person tasked with preserving the monarchy's reputation, influence, and legacy. Every move he makes is scrutinized, every word weighed for both internal and public impact. In that context, stripping Meghan of her titles and placing them with Lady Louise was far more than a family matter. It was a statement about power, tradition, and control. The decision-making process began months earlier, long before any public speculation arose. Advisors, senior courtiers, and legal experts were consulted quietly, their conversations revolving around questions of precedent, optics, and the potential fallout. Was Meghan's role within the monarchy sustainable? Could her public influence coexist with the expectations of tradition? Would retaining her titles benefit or undermine the family's carefully curated image? Each of these questions carried enormous weight, and each answer shaped the path Charles ultimately chose. Within the palace, discussions were described as intense, meticulous, and sometimes heated. Courtiers debated every angle: the symbolic importance of titles, the potential reaction of the public, and the internal message it would send to other family members. Some favored compromise, a soft transition, or symbolic retention of certain honors, but Charles remained resolute. He believed that clarity and finality were essential. Ambiguity, in his view, risked confusion, media speculation, and internal dissent. Family dynamics played an equally crucial role. While public narratives often emphasize harmony, the reality is that the royal household operates like a highly sophisticated organizational hierarchy, where relationships, loyalties, and reputations are constantly evaluated. Charles had to weigh his relationships with William, Edward, and other key family members. He had to consider Harry's reactions, Meghan's public persona, and the broader implications for succession and ceremonial duties. Every conversation was calculated, every decision layered with both emotional and strategic considerations. Legal advisors added another dimension. In the monarchy, titles are not simply honorary. They are entwined with law, precedent, and ceremonial responsibility. Removing or transferring titles requires careful adherence to established protocol. Charles's team meticulously reviewed prior cases, historical precedents, and the potential consequences of any deviation. The advice was unanimous. The transfer to Louise was permissible, strategically sound, and publicly defensible. But executing it required tact, timing, and an awareness of the volatile media landscape surrounding Meghan and Harry. When the king finally made the decision, it was not impulsive, it was deliberate, considered, and strategic. His primary goal was to protect the monarchy's stability and uphold the hierarchy that had defined the institution for centuries. Meghan's titles had become a point of tension, both internally and externally. While she had contributed to charity, public engagements, and modernizing aspects of royal perception, Her global influence and outsider status created complexities that Charles deemed incompatible with long-term continuity. The letter delivered to Meghan was carefully crafted to reflect this. Its tone was formal, authoritative, and unambiguous. It conveyed respect for her service, but made clear that the titles had been reassigned. Every word was weighed to balance legal precision with diplomatic tact, ensuring that the decision could withstand both public scrutiny and internal debate. Yet beneath the surface, the message was firm. The king's authority was final, and the family's hierarchy would be reinforced. Private meetings leading up to the announcement reveal the depth of deliberation. William reportedly expressed understanding, though privately he remained concerned about public perception and Harry's reaction. Advisors monitored potential fallout from media outlets, social media, and international observers. Every possible scenario was discussed, from immediate public backlash to longer-term reputational consequences. In these sessions, Charles's resolve never wavered. He believed that while the transition might be emotionally difficult, it was essential for the integrity of the monarchy. Even within the king's inner circle, there were whispers of dissent. Some suggested allowing Meghan to retain certain ceremonial honors or keep one title as a symbolic gesture. Others warned that public opinion might view the move as unnecessarily harsh, potentially inflaming tensions with Harry and damaging the monarchy's image. Yet Charles held firm, emphasizing that precedent and clarity outweighed individual sentiment. His vision was a monarchy that could endure beyond personal feelings, one that relied on bloodline and tradition to navigate turbulent times. What is perhaps most striking is how personal the decision was. While informed by advisors, law, and precedent, Charles's choice reflected his own judgment, his sense of duty, and his understanding of family dynamics. Titles, after all, are not merely symbolic. They are markers of trust, responsibility, and belonging. By choosing to reassign them to Lady Louise, Charles was sending a clear message. The monarchy values lineage and tradition above public acclaim or modern reinterpretation. Yet, even with careful planning, the human element could not be ignored. The emotional consequences for Meghan were profound. Courtiers noted that she was blindsided, feeling the weight of both personal loss and public scrutiny. Harry faced his own dilemma, caught between loyalty to his wife and respect for his father's authority. For William and other family members, the situation was equally tense as they navigated the delicate balance between family loyalty, public perception, and the demands of protocol. In the end, the king's decision was finalized with the precision and authority that the monarchy demands. The letter to Meghan was drafted, reviewed, and delivered with the utmost care. The public announcement followed a carefully timed sequence, ensuring that the narrative was controlled and that the transition appeared orderly, deliberate, and consistent with centuries of royal precedent. But even as the decision was implemented, one question lingered. How would Meghan respond? Would she accept the reassignment quietly, continue her public work independently, or fight back against the institution that had, in an instant, redefined her status? The answer would shape not only her own path, but also the public perception of the monarchy, the family dynamic, and the broader narrative surrounding titles, tradition, and modernity. And while the king's decision appeared final, behind palace doors, subtle tensions were already simmering. Advisors speculated about potential leaks, media narratives, and Harry's next moves. Courtiers whispered about alliances forming in unexpected corners, while family members assessed the implications for succession, visibility, and influence. The reality was clear. Even a well-considered decision, backed by authority and precedent, could not escape the unpredictable forces of emotion, ambition, and public scrutiny. And so, as the letter reached Meghan and the titles were formally reassigned, the stage was set for a drama that would unfold in public and private spheres alike. The king's decision had been made, but the consequences were just beginning to ripple through the royal family, the media, and the world at large. One thing was certain. The finality of the decision did not mark the end of the story. Instead, it was the opening act in a series of revelations, reactions, and confrontations that would test loyalty, power, and the resilience of everyone involved. And as Meghan absorbed the reality of this moment, she could not yet know the storms that were about to descend, not just from outside forces, but but from within the very walls of the palace she had once called home. The world saw Meghan Markle as poised, articulate, and in control. Every public appearance, every interview, every charity event projected confidence and grace. But behind the closed doors of her London residence, the reality was far different. Titles stripped, privileges reassigned, and her place in the royal hierarchy officially undermined, Meghan experienced a profound, almost physical collapse of emotion. It started with a wave of disbelief. She stared at the king's letter for what felt like hours, rereading every carefully worded sentence, hoping that somehow she had misread it. The words were unambiguous. Lady Louise Windsor would assume the title she had held. The king's decision was final. There was no room for negotiation, no hint of compromise. The shock was immediate, visceral, and overwhelming. Imagine that moment, the solitude of a grand estate, the soft hum of the city outside, and the crushing realization that a part of your identity had been stripped away. Meghan, a woman who had endured relentless public scrutiny and personal attacks for years, found herself utterly unprepared for the personal devastation this decision would bring. The titles were more than names. They represented recognition, authority, and a bridge into the royal institution that she had worked tirelessly to integrate into. Losing them was not only public humiliation, but a deeply personal wound. The emotional unraveling began subtly. A tightened chest, a racing heart, moments of tears she could not contain. Friends describe her pacing the floors, speaking quietly to herself, repeating phrases from the letter like a mantra in an attempt to process the reality. The collapse was not just about the loss of titles. It was the culmination of years of tension, isolation, and the constant battle to define her role in an institution that often resisted her presence. And yet, Meghan was not alone. Prince Harry, ever vigilant and protective, immediately recognized the depth of her distress. Their conversations, private and urgent, were filled with a mix of comfort, anger, and strategic discussion. Harry knew that Meghan's heartbreak was compounded by the public nature of the decision. The media would seize on her vulnerability, turning personal pain into spectacle. Every word, every expression, every reaction could be dissected and amplified, intensifying the emotional pressure. Friends and confidants recount moments of raw vulnerability. Meghan, usually measured and composed, allowed herself to show the full spectrum of emotion: frustration at being sidelined, fear of public perception, and a profound sense of betrayal by an institution she had once embraced. The collapse was punctuated by moments of disbelief. She would revisit the events of her wedding, her charitable work, and her public speeches, questioning whether any of it had meaning if titles, recognition, and formal legitimacy could be so abruptly withdrawn. The private fallout was not confined to tears and quiet anguish. Meghan's nights were restless, filled with anxiety and self-questioning. She considered every angle. Should she speak publicly? Should she retreat? Could she regain influence? Or had the king's decision permanently redefined her role? Each question fueled the emotional turbulence, as the line between personal grief and professional consequence blurred. As the news circulated in whispers among palace insiders, the tension grew. Meghan's emotional collapse became intertwined with the delicate politics of the royal household. Courtiers observed her retreating to private spaces, noting both her vulnerability and her resilience. She faced a dual reality: the need to process personal devastation while simultaneously navigating an environment that demanded composure, grace, and strategic discretion. Every encounter, every conversation, became a negotiation between raw emotion and the disciplined poise expected of a royal, or in Meghan's case, a former title holder now stripped of formal authority. The public's role in this drama cannot be overstated. Meghan's situation was amplified by the media, social commentary, and online discourse. Headlines painted her either as a victim of palace politics or a figure who had overstepped her bounds. Social media became a battlefield of sympathy, judgment, and speculation. Meghan's collapse was not solely an internal matter. It was a spectacle watched, debated, and dissected around the world. Yet amidst the despair, Meghan's inner strength began to emerge. Even in the depths of emotional turmoil, she displayed remarkable resilience. Friends report moments of quiet determination, sitting alone, reflecting on strategies, and considering the next steps. This was not simply grief. It was the birth of resolve, a recognition that while the king's decision had changed her titles, it could not define her legacy, her voice, or her influence. And still, the emotional stakes were high. The collapse was punctuated by the relentless pressure of family dynamics. Prince Harry's concern, the subtle judgments of other royal family members, and the weight of public expectation compounded her distress. Meghan's identity was intertwined with her titles, her role, and her place in the hierarchy, and the removal of these markers forced her to confront the fragility of her position in a system she had entered as an outsider. Amid the chaos, Meghan made private reflections about the monarchy itself. The contrast between Lady Louise's poised ascendancy and her own tumultuous journey was stark. Louise, groomed from birth, stepping into the spotlight with the ease of lineage and tradition, highlighted the structural and personal inequalities inherent in the system. Meghan's collapse was not just emotional. It was a confrontation with the harsh realities of family, status, and legacy. Friends and aides described moments of near panic, followed by periods of stoic reflection. Meghan vacillated between despair and determination, understanding that the coming days would require careful navigation. The emotional collapse, while profound, became the crucible in which her resilience was forged, a combination of personal fortitude and strategic awareness that would define her next steps. The intensity of her emotional reaction also had immediate practical implications. Decisions about public appearances, charitable initiatives, and media interactions had to be recalibrated. Every move now carried the weight of scrutiny, and Meghan understood that missteps could compound both personal grief and public criticism. It was a delicate balancing act, requiring extraordinary mental focus amidst profound emotional upheaval. And yet, within the collapse, a spark of strategy emerged. Meghan began to recognize that titles, while symbolically important, were not the entirety of her influence. She began to conceptualize ways to continue her work, maintain her public presence, and leverage her platform, even without the formal recognition of the monarchy. This was not the surrender of defeat. It was the first step in a recalibration, an acknowledgement that resilience, creativity, and strategy could compensate for formal loss. But as Meghan navigated this personal crucible, the palace continued its own machinations. Advisors, insiders, and family members were acutely aware of the emotional landscape. Decisions about public messaging, timing of announcements, and management of media narratives were being made in parallel with Meghan's private struggle. The emotional collapse was not just a personal matter. It intersected with strategy, optics, and institutional control. And then came the realization that would haunt Meghan in those quiet moments. The emotional collapse, the private despair, and the shock of title loss were only the beginning. Beneath the formalities and public statements lay deeper currents of tension, hidden alliances, and potential conflicts that had been simmering for years. Meghan understood that this was not just about titles. It was about power, perception, and the intricate, often ruthless, dynamics of a royal institution determined to preserve itself at all costs. And so, as she processed the loss, her tears and quiet reflections carried an unspoken question. How far would the royal family go to maintain tradition? How far would she have to fight, adapt, or endure to reclaim agency in a world that had just redefined her place within it? The answers were not yet clear, but one thing was certain. The storm had only just begun, and Meghan's emotional collapse marked the opening act of a much larger, more complex drama, a drama that would test loyalty, resilience, and the very fabric of her relationship with the monarchy. When Meghan received the letter stripping her of her titles, Prince Harry's world shifted in an instant. He had spent years navigating the pressures of royal life alongside her, protecting her from scrutiny while managing his own complex relationships with the monarchy. But this moment, King Charles's final, unappealable decision, was unlike anything he had faced before. It wasn't simply a blow to Meghan. It was a test of Harry's ability to safeguard his family, their legacy, and their public image in a landscape where every move was magnified, dissected, and scrutinized. Harry's initial reaction was one of disbelief, followed by a controlled fury. Friends and insiders describe him as pacing, making urgent calls to advisors, and strategizing how to respond without escalating tensions. Unlike Meghan, who was processing the emotional devastation in private, Harry's response was action-oriented, a combination of protective instinct and strategic foresight. Every decision he made in the following hours would ripple across public perception, internal family dynamics, and media narratives. He understood the stakes. On one side, there was Meghan's personal anguish, the pain of public humiliation, the loss of identity symbols, the stripping away of titles that represented her integration into the royal family. On the other, there was the monarchy itself, an institution that demanded respect for hierarchy, tradition, and the king's authority. Harry had to navigate both simultaneously, walking a tightrope between loyalty to his wife and acknowledgement of the system he was born into. The first priority was Meghan's emotional well-being. Harry ensured that she was not alone, staying close, offering counsel, and providing reassurance that their partnership would withstand this challenge. But he also had to consider the optics. The media was already speculating, and any overt emotional display could be spun into narratives of discord, instability, or grievance. Harry's role was not only to support Meghan privately, but to shield her publicly while planning a path forward that maintained dignity and influence. Behind the scenes, Harry began to assess the situation strategically. He convened a series of private meetings with legal advisors, media consultants, and trusted confidants. Each discussion explored multiple scenarios: how to respond publicly, whether to issue statements, how to manage the narrative, and most importantly, how to protect Meghan from further institutional marginalization. These conversations were intense, often tense, as Harry weighed the emotional and reputational consequences of every potential move. Family dynamics added another layer of complexity. William, his older brother, was reportedly aware of the situation but chose a measured, cautious approach, remaining silent publicly while privately expressing concerns about the fallout. Harry had to consider how any action he took might affect his relationship with William, the king, and other family members. Every call, meeting, and decision required careful calibration. One misstep could exacerbate tensions and draw the family further into public conflict. Harry's protective instinct extended beyond Meghan to their children. He was acutely aware of how public narratives around the stripping of titles could affect Archie and Lilibet. In private conversations, he emphasized the importance of shielding them from the media frenzy, maintaining a sense of normalcy, and ensuring that their upbringing remained as stable as possible despite the upheaval. His calculations were not just about immediate consequences. They were about the long-term emotional and psychological well-being of his family. Strategically, Harry also began evaluating options for public engagement. Could they issue statements, clarify their positions, or redirect attention to charitable initiatives? How could they assert influence and maintain visibility without escalating tensions with the monarchy? These were delicate considerations. Harry knew that the wrong move could be portrayed as defiance, while inaction could be interpreted as submission. Each choice carried both risk and opportunity. The intensity of the situation was compounded by the relentless media scrutiny. Journalists, commentators, and social media influencers dissected every interaction, every appearance, and every leaked detail. Headlines ranged from sympathetic portrayals of Meghan as a victim to critical narratives framing the couple as troublemakers. Harry understood that public perception could shape the monarchy's response, influence internal dynamics, and even affect legal or ceremonial proceedings. Controlling the narrative became as important as managing private emotion. Amid all this, Harry's personal conflict was profound. He had to reconcile loyalty to his wife with loyalty to his family, all while managing his own emotions and long-standing grievances with the institution. The stripping of Meghan's titles triggered not only concern for her welfare, but also a renewed awareness of his own vulnerability within the royal system. Every decision made in the wake of this event was intertwined with broader questions about agency, legacy, and identity within a family bound by tradition. Harry's protective measures extended to proactive planning. He explored potential legal avenues, media strategies, and private negotiations aimed at minimizing damage. Each step was calculated, deliberate, and often confidential, reflecting the gravity of the situation and the stakes involved. He knew that any misstep could inflame tensions, escalate media coverage, and potentially compromise Meghan's well-being. Yet, despite the strategic focus, the human element could not be ignored. Harry was acutely aware of Meghan's emotional state, the vulnerability, the sense of betrayal, and the grief she was experiencing. He balanced the need for practical action with empathy, offering support, reassurance, and a steady presence. In many ways, this emotional labor was as critical as any legal or strategic maneuver, providing Meghan with the stability and confidence she needed to navigate an unprecedented challenge. The complexity of the situation extended beyond immediate concerns. Harry also had to anticipate the long-term implications of the king's decision. How would this affect future interactions with the monarchy? What precedent did it set for other family members? Could Meghan's public influence continue without the backing of formal titles? Each of these questions required foresight, judgment, and careful planning. And then there was the matter of timing. Every action, whether a statement, appearance, or private conversation, had to be timed perfectly to avoid escalating conflict, fueling media speculation, or undermining Meghan's position. Harry's role became a constant negotiation between immediate response and strategic patience, balancing emotional support with calculated public engagement. Despite the immense pressure, Harry's response was characterized by a singular focus: protecting his family. Every decision, every intervention, every conversation was aimed at ensuring Meghan and their children could navigate this upheaval with dignity, security, and resilience. In doing so, he demonstrated the delicate balance required of someone caught between love, loyalty, and the institutional demands of royalty. But even the most careful planning could not anticipate every twist. As Harry strategized, subtle palace maneuvers and behind-the-scenes alliances began to emerge, threatening to complicate even the most well-laid plans. Advisors whispered of potential leaks, media manipulations, and internal resistance. And in the midst of it all, Harry realized that protecting Meghan was not just a matter of immediate action. It would be an ongoing battle against forces both visible and hidden, external and internal. And so, as the dust settled from the initial shock, one truth became unmistakably clear. Harry's role as protector had never been more critical. The stripping of Meghan's titles was not an isolated event. It was a catalyst for conflict, strategy, and revelation. Every choice he made in the coming days would shape not only Meghan's trajectory, but also the public perception of their family, the monarchy's response, and the unfolding drama within one of the world's most scrutinized households. Yet even as he fortified his strategy and shielded his family, Harry knew that the storm was only beginning. Beneath the veneer of protocol and public statements, tensions simmered, secrets loomed, and the repercussions of the king's decision were far from fully realized. One misstep, one leak, one poorly timed comment could ignite a chain reaction with consequences none of them could predict. And so, in the quiet moments, away from cameras and headlines, Harry confronted the reality that would define the next chapter. Protecting his family meant navigating a labyrinth of loyalty, media scrutiny, and royal politics where the stakes were higher than ever and the outcomes uncertain. The path forward was fraught, the challenges immense, and the next revelation, still hidden, would shake the foundations of the family and the institution alike. The moment the king's decision became known outside the palace walls, the world erupted. Social media exploded with headlines, commentary, and speculation. Royal tabloids raced to publish breaking news. Opinion pieces debated the fairness of Meghan losing her titles, while others questioned her behavior, style, and place within the monarchy. Every platform, from mainstream news to Instagram and TikTok, buzzed with the unfolding drama. Meghan's personal crisis had become a global spectacle, and the public, as always, had an opinion. For Meghan, the media storm was as relentless as it was personal. She had navigated scrutiny before, but this was different. This was not a passing headline or a minor controversy. It was an official decree, a statement from the king himself, amplified across every possible channel. The stripping of her titles was not just legal or ceremonial, it was symbolic, and the media understood that symbolism better than anyone. Every image, every quote, every subtle detail of her public persona became fodder for analysis, critique, and judgment. The first wave of coverage was a mix of sympathy and sensationalism. Some outlets framed Meghan as the victim of an outdated institution, a modern woman punished for stepping outside the traditional boundaries of royalty. Others highlighted controversy, painting her as a disruptive force, someone whose celebrity and assertiveness had clashed with centuries of protocol. Headlines ranged from the empathetic, Meghan stripped of titles, a royal injustice, to the sensational, royal shakeup, Meghan loses everything to Lady Louise. Social media amplified the intensity. Twitter threads dissected every word of the king's announcement. Instagram stories speculated on Meghan's emotional state. TikTok creators dramatized the events with clips, commentary, and memes. Even seemingly minor details, a picture of Meghan looking solemn, a video of her walking with Harry, were scrutinized and interpreted as confirmation of narrative angles. Every move she made, every glance caught on camera, became a headline. Meghan's inner circle recognized the danger immediately. Public perception was critical, and the speed of media amplification made managing the narrative incredibly difficult. Advisors worked around the clock, drafting potential statements, preparing for interviews, and planning appearances that could mitigate negative coverage. But even the best-prepared strategies struggled against the velocity of modern news cycles, where speculation spreads faster than facts. The emotional toll on Meghan was profound. She had to process grief over the loss of her titles while simultaneously defending her image in a world eager to judge. Every moment was a balancing act, maintaining composure for public appearances, managing private grief, and anticipating the next wave of media attention. Friends and aides describe her oscillating between moments of quiet despair and intense focus, planning her next moves even as her heart ached with personal loss. Meanwhile, Harry faced the dual challenge of supporting Meghan and addressing the public narrative. Leaks, rumors, and speculation threatened to distort the reality of the situation. Every article, tweet, and broadcast segment had the potential to inflame tensions, damage reputations, or undermine their family's position. Harry's strategic efforts were relentless, monitoring media coverage, briefing allies, and considering carefully calibrated public statements that would protect Meghan while maintaining a degree of dignity and restraint. The tabloids thrived on conflict. Stories framed Meghan as either the victim or the provocateur, depending on the outlet's perspective. Leaks from unnamed palace insiders fueled speculation about internal family dynamics, alliances, and disagreements. Headlines suggested intrigue, betrayal, and hidden agendas. Every narrative twist served to heighten the drama, leaving Meghan and Harry in a constant state of defense, even as they planned their next steps. Public reaction was equally intense. Social media users debated the fairness of the decision, with some sympathizing with Meghan's position and others criticizing her for perceived missteps. Forums and comment sections lit up with discussions about tradition versus modernity, celebrity versus lineage, and the implications for the monarchy. The couple's every public gesture was dissected, and minor missteps could be magnified into perceived scandals. Despite the intensity, Meghan and Harry understood that the media storm could not be ignored. They had to anticipate narratives, respond where necessary, and strategically assert their position without escalating conflict. Every move became a calculated exercise in media management, balancing emotional honesty with the need to maintain a controlled public image. Yet, even as Meghan navigated public scrutiny, private pressures mounted. Friends reported that she spent hours reviewing articles, analyzing social media trends, and considering potential responses. Each headline, tweet, or viral post was not just information. It was a reflection of public perception, influencing both personal and strategic decisions. The emotional and mental strain was relentless, compounded by the realization that the narrative was largely out of her control. The media frenzy also exposed deeper structural issues within the monarchy. The rapid coverage of the title reassignment highlighted the intersection of tradition, public perception, and celebrity culture. In the age of instant information, every royal decision, however formal or procedural, is subject to immediate global scrutiny. Meghan's situation became a case study in how media can amplify personal loss into international spectacle, transforming private family decisions into public drama. And yet, in the midst of the chaos, subtle patterns emerged. Observers noted how certain outlets favored sympathetic portrayals while others amplified criticism. Social media influencers, often outside traditional journalistic standards, created narratives that could not be easily countered by conventional PR strategies. The combination of mainstream media, independent commentary, and viral social content created a storm that Meghan and Harry had to navigate with unprecedented vigilance. Within the palace, the response to media coverage was measured but strategic. Courtiers monitored stories, identified potential leaks, and coordinated messaging to control the narrative where possible. Every interview, every photo release, and every statement was orchestrated to balance transparency, discretion, and the monarchy's image. Behind the formal facade, advisors worked tirelessly to anticipate the next wave of media reaction, knowing that public perception could influence not only Meghan's reputation but the broader stability of the royal institution. For Meghan, the emotional pressure of media scrutiny was compounded by the symbolic weight of her lost titles. Each headline, each social media post, served as a reminder of her displacement and the shifting power dynamics within the family. Yet, even amid the relentless coverage, she began to find moments of clarity, recognizing that while titles could be taken, her influence, voice, and strategic acumen remained intact. The challenge was not merely survival. It was maintaining agency, shaping perception, and preparing for the next moves in a drama that was far from over. And then came the unexpected, a series of leaked insider reports that added fuel to the fire. Alleged palace tensions, private disagreements, and behind-the-scenes alliances became part of the public record. Every leak, every rumor, heightened scrutiny, and increased pressure.